1,000 faces, one mask. It smiles like a saint, but beneath that smile hide centuries of blood, gold, and stolen gods. Catholicism is not one religion. It's a mask worn by countless others. Behind the crucifix is a collage of stolen symbols, borrowed deities, and repurposed rituals. The Church didn't conquer the world with originality. It did it with theft and disguise. It absorbed pagan gods, renamed them saints, and claimed old customs as new commandments. The Virgin Mary, she's Isis, she's Artemis, she's every mother goddess rebranded in blue robes. The saints, they're old heroes, war gods, fertility spirits, turned into holy intercessors so the pagans wouldn't revolt. Christmas, that's Saturnalia with a nativity scene slapped on top. Easter, that's Eostri's festival, bunny and all, just sprinkled with resurrection sugar. Catholicism didn't erase the old ways. It swallowed them whole, digested them, and wore their skin. The brilliance of the Church lies not in creation, but in camouflage. Like a shapeshifter, it moved into new lands and changed colors. In Rome, it spoke Latin. In Ireland, it kept Celtic rhythms. In Africa, it danced with tribal drums. In Latin America, it painted itself with indigenous blood. It became whatever the people needed it to be, so long as they obeyed. But the mask has cracks. Look close and you'll see contradictions bleeding through. The Church preaches humility but wears crowns. It claims peace but funded crusades. It teaches poverty while hoarding unimaginable wealth. Its rituals claim to connect with the divine, but they reek of theater. Sacraments choreographed like stage plays, incense and bells replacing spiritual depth with spectacle. And behind every mask is a lie. The lie that Catholicism is pure, that it descended untouched from Christ, that it is the one true path. But if that's true, why the plagiarism? Why the absorption of every culture it touched? Because it needed numbers, power, control. A religion that grew not by truth but by mimicry. Like a virus adapting to its host, the mask also hides corruption. From the Inquisition to the abuse scandals, the Church has perfected the art of damage control. When priests became predators, the Church shuffled them like playing cards. When doctrines became inconvenient, they were reinterpreted or ignored. The mask smiled while the truth rotted beneath. Yet millions still believe, not because of truth, but because the mask is beautiful. The architecture, the music, the art, it's all stunning. But beauty is not innocence. The Sistine Chapel was painted with guilt money. The hymns echo in halls built on slave labor and stolen land. The mask is painted in gold, but it's the gold of conquered peoples and silenced voices. This is not faith. This is theater. A long-running performance where every gesture is scripted and every doubt is punished. Catholicism doesn't answer life's questions. It distracts from them with pageantry and dogma. And in doing so, it keeps the mask on tight, hoping you never look underneath. But masks fall. And when this one does, what we'll see is not the face of God, but the face of empire. Roman, ruthless, and reborn in robes of white. Empire of the mind. It doesn't need armies to conquer you. It just needs you to believe. Catholicism, more than just a religion, has been one of the most successful psychological empires in history. It colonized not only lands, but also imaginations. It established invisible borders in the mind, marking territories of guilt, fear, obedience, and salvation. And once inside, it doesn't leave easily. The genius of this empire is its ability to normalize its rule. From the moment a Catholic child is born, they are welcomed not with freedom, but with indoctrination. Baptized, named, and claimed. The sacramental system is structured like checkpoints in a mental state. Baptism, confession, communion, confirmation, marriage or celibacy, and finally, death with last rites. Each stage is tied not to personal growth but to the Church's framework, a divine bureaucracy that monitors your soul. And then there is confession, perhaps the most psychologically invasive tool ever devised. You are taught to scan your thoughts, your desires, your dreams, and classify them as sins. Lust is sin. Doubt is sin. Pride is sin. Your very human nature becomes evidence against you. But forgiveness, that lies in the hands of the priest, a man given godlike power to absolve or condemn. This is not spirituality. This is psychological surveillance. The Church implanted concepts like original sin, the idea that you are born guilty, not because of anything you did, but because of something two mythical people did in a garden. This sets the stage for dependency. If you are born broken, you need the Church to be whole. If you are born damned, only it can save you. It's a divine monopoly, and the price of salvation is obedience. This mental colonization doesn't stop with personal guilt. It extends to thought control. The Church has long censored books, art, science, and even language. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum, a list of banned books, ran for centuries, silencing dissent. Thinkers like Galileo were threatened for daring to challenge the Church's narrative of reality. If the Church says the earth is the center, then questioning that is not just error, it's heresy. Even the architecture of Catholic churches reflects the empire of the mind. High ceilings, intimidating altars, and stained glass windows aren't just beautiful. They're designed to make you feel small, to condition awe and submission. The message is clear. God is above you. You are nothing without the Church. Your body is weak. Your desires are dangerous. But obedience, that's holiness. Consider how the Church shaped concepts of time and morality. The 7 deadly sins, the Sunday obligation, the calendar of saints. Every day has a spiritual meaning. Every hour must be watched. This constant awareness makes the individual feel watched even when alone. It's internal surveillance, a God-shaped camera in the mind. The fear of hell is perhaps the Church's most powerful psychological weapon. Eternity in fire for a single sin. The details are horrifying. Demons, torture, isolation. Yet the Church teaches this not as metaphor, but as literal fate. And who decides your eternal fate? The institution that holds the sacraments. It's a spiritual cartel, both the judge and the dealer. This mental empire has endured for centuries because it adapts. It now wears softer clothing, smiles instead of swords. But the structure is the same. It still teaches that doubt is dangerous, that sex is shameful unless controlled, that authority must not be questioned. Its grip may feel gentle, but it is firm. You don't see the cage because it's made of rituals, hymns, and prayers. Even those who leave Catholicism often struggle to shake its influence. The guilt remains, the fear lingers. The language of sin, penance, and redemption stays embedded. That is the mark of a successful empire, when even the rebels speak its tongue. Catholicism does not just conquer nations, it conquers minds. And once your mind is occupied, your choices, your values, your very identity are shaped by its invisible hand. The battle is not over land anymore. It's in the space between your ears. And most don't even know they've been conquered, from mystics to machinery. Once, the Catholic faith was a river of mystics and visions. Now it feels more like a factory of rituals and rules. In its early days, Catholicism was ablaze with mystery. The Desert Fathers, early monks, and visionaries wandered into wildernesses not to build empires, but to find God. They starved their bodies, heard divine voices, and saw visions not meant for doctrine, but transformation. These mystics lived with raw spiritual hunger. They weren't trying to be priests or cardinals. They wanted the living flame of the divine. They meditated in silence for weeks, renounced all wealth, and embraced suffering not as punishment, but as a way to break open the soul. But then, over time, something happened. That fire was trapped in golden cages. Visions were replaced with Vatican-approved sermons. Dreams turned into doctrines, and mystical union with the divine became a checklist of do's and don'ts. The Church stopped encouraging people to experience God and instead taught them how to obey Him. Mysticism was messy, unpredictable, and couldn't be controlled, and control became the name of the game. The moment the Church began building institutions, seminaries, and bureaucracies, it also began silencing its mystics. Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross. These were voices crying in the wilderness, but even they were barely tolerated. Others weren't so lucky. Women who claimed visions were often branded heretics or witches. Men who spoke of a God beyond form were locked away or burned. The early church was a place of fire and spirit. The later church became one of marble and machinery. Instead of nourishing the soul, Catholicism built systems. Parish schedules, confession routines, catechism classes, bishop reports, all efficient, all clean. But where was the spirit? Where was the divine madness that makes saints dance and prophets cry in the streets? Gone, replaced with the hum of an ever-growing religious machine. And like any machine, it needed maintenance. That's when money entered the temple. The church grew wealthy by selling certainty. Indulgences were a kind of spiritual vending machine. Put in coin, get out salvation. The body of Christ, once a sacred mystery, became a product distributed en masse. Confession booths multiplied like bank branches. A man with a robe and a title claimed the power to forgive sins. Just like that. No journey, no tears, no personal reckoning. Just a stamp on the soul. This wasn't the faith of mystics. This was the assembly line of spiritual conformity. Mystics ask dangerous questions. What if God speaks directly to me? What if heaven is not a place but a state of being? But Catholicism tightened the screws. It wanted unity, not in spirit, but in structure. Every answer had to match Rome's. Every prayer had to follow the script. The wild garden of early spirituality was bulldozed to build a fortress. And so Catholicism became a machine not just of rituals, but of identity. You were either inside or outside, saved or damned. There was no room for mystery, only definitions. The church began to resemble the empire it once claimed to resist. Hierarchical, bureaucratic, territorial. Bishops were like governors. Popes were like emperors with their own armies, palaces, and politics. God became a throne surrounded by rules, not a flame within the heart. Ironically, the more the church tried to systematize the divine, the more spiritually dry it became. People began to drift, to doubt. They still lit candles, but their souls were dim. They still kneeled, but their hearts no longer soared. Many found themselves lost in the motions, performing rituals without meaning. A machine can keep running even when no one believes in it anymore. Meanwhile, mystics never went away. They simply went underground. Even today, people seek God through silence, nature, personal revelation. They leave the church not out of rebellion, but because the machine cannot hold the fire they feel inside. They read ancient texts, chant old prayers, not because they want religion, but because they crave experience, direct, alive, personal. The tragedy is that Catholicism could have been something else. If it had embraced its mystics, cherished its poets, and welcomed spiritual seekers instead of managing them, it might have remained a living, breathing tradition. Instead, it built walls and called it faith. It standardized spiritual growth like it was mass-producing saints. The machine needed certainty. But God does not live in certainty. God lives in paradox, in the trembling heart, in the silence between words. The mystics knew this. That's why they cried, danced, fasted, and disappeared into deserts. They didn't want to obey God. They wanted to become one with Him. Today, people look at Catholicism and see rules, scandals, wealth, and hierarchy. But buried under the machinery is a forgotten fire. The question is, can it ever burn again? Heresy by vote. They didn't hear God. They took a vote. In the early centuries of Christianity, the question was not, what do you believe, but what have you experienced? But as Catholicism grew into an institution, belief became a political process. Councils were called not to listen to divine voices, but to settle power struggles. Heresy became less about spiritual danger and more about disagreeing with the party line. Take the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. The central question, was Jesus of the same substance as God the Father, or just similar? This was not just theology, it was politics. Bishops shouted, argued, even physically fought, and then they voted. The majority ruled that Jesus was consubstantial, and that was that. The losing side branded heretics, banished, exiled, their writings burned, not because a divine voice thundered from the sky, but because they lost a vote. And this pattern continued. Council after council, bishops gathered like senators to decide the official beliefs. The Trinity, the nature of Christ, the number of sacraments, purgatory, transubstantiation, doctrines that millions would be forced to accept, or else, were determined not by revelation, but by majority. Truth, it seemed, was whatever the bishops agreed on at the time. This was not the movement Jesus started. Jesus didn't hold councils. He didn't vote. He spoke in parables, healed the broken, and challenged power. His message was simple. Love God, love your neighbor. But over time, that message was buried under layers of theological rulings. The early church became a parliament, and the Spirit gave way to structure. The church claimed to guard eternal truth, but how can truth be eternal if it changes with every council? What was heresy in one century became orthodoxy in another. What was forbidden once became doctrine later. The Immaculate Conception wasn't official until 1854. Papal infallibility, not until 1870. That means for nearly 2,000 years, millions of Christians lived and died without believing these things. And suddenly, not believing them made you a heretic. It wasn't God who changed, it was the votes. And behind every vote was pressure. Political alliances, threats from emperors, fear of rebellion. Many bishops didn't speak their hearts. They followed the crowd or bowed to power. Some councils were even called by emperors themselves. Imagine that. Secular rulers deciding what counts as divine truth. The church speaks of divine guidance, but history shows a messy human process. Councils split, popes disagreed, whole regions resisted for centuries. When people refused to accept the new rules, they were labeled rebels, hunted down, or forced into submission. Heresy became not about spiritual error, but institutional defiance. The saddest part? Many so-called heretics were deeply spiritual people. They weren't trying to destroy the church, they were trying to revive it. Think of the Cathars, who preached poverty, non-violence and purity, burned. The Gnostics, who believed the divine lived within, erased. The reformers who spoke of grace and inner truth, excommunicated. What the church called heresy was often just unapproved truth. And when you label something heresy by vote, you stop listening. You shut down conversation. You destroy the very heart of spiritual growth, questioning, seeking, wondering. Jesus welcomed doubters. The church silenced them. Today, the legacy remains. Belief is still a matter of ticking the right boxes. Agree with the church, and you're in. Question a doctrine, and you're out. But what if someone votes differently tomorrow? What if the next council changes course again? Truth shouldn't be decided by ballots. It should be lived, experienced, and known in the soul. The church feared division, so it built walls. But in doing so, it divided itself from the Spirit. You cannot vote your way into divine revelation. You can only open yourself to it. But when power becomes the goal, truth becomes negotiable. And so Catholicism, in trying to preserve unity, sacrificed authenticity. It created a world where faith was no longer a journey, but a contract. Believe what we voted on, or be damned. The mystics weep. The prophets shout from the wilderness. But inside the council halls, the ballots keep falling like leaves from a dying tree.